Let's colour a page using just 2 markers to recreate golden hour light through a paned window. But I'm also going to layer the ink in parts to push the depth even further. Let's start by mapping out the shadows with a pencil. The fun thing about starting with the light colour is that at first, with no shadows, everything looks kind of backward. Because the lightest areas, the white of the paper, are where the darkest parts will be. But then as soon as the shadows go down, the illusion falls into place and you get a sudden shift in atmosphere. I think that's part of the reason I keep coming back to light effects like this. They give you that moment of transformation where the page flips from flat shapes into something with depth. I've always enjoyed playing with light and shadow in my work. In art class at school, I would paint high contrast black and white portraits. And then later, when I became a photographer, I carried that same approach with me, using shadow to shape the mood of an image. And that's probably why these two-tone effects feel so natural to me. They strip an image down to its basics, but somehow make it more interesting. I'm working on a printed scan rather than the original page because I wanted more wall space for the shadows to stretch across. In the original, everything sat quite close to the edge, and with an effect like this, the light becomes a focal point. So I needed that extra room for the shapes to really come through. I've dropped a link in the description to the Self-Love Colouring book by Hikaru Kotz, as well as the Ohuhu alcohol markers that I'm using. For trickier light effects like this one, I'll usually plan the page digitally first. That way I can play around with the shadows until they look right. Then when I switch to markers on paper, which is far less forgiving, I already know where I'm going and just have to hope I don't completely ruin it. Okay, that's the illuminated areas all filled out. So let's add the shadows in dark violet. And it's at this stage when everything starts to make visual sense. I usually like to pick 2 complementary colours from opposite sides of the colour wheel, to really push the contrast, but here I wanted something a bit softer. So even though the 2 colours sit apart on the spectrum, they both lean warm. That shared warmth softens the contrast, giving the page a subtle harmony, while leaving enough tension to keep it interesting. When I'm mapping shadows, I start by picking a light source. It might be a window or a lamp within the scene, or you can invent one off the page, like I'm doing here, which I think usually makes for a more interesting visual, and gives you more freedom to shape the effect you want. Once you've picked a light source, the shadows should stretch away from it in the same direction. And that consistency really helps to make the scene feel believable. The further away an object is from the surface catching the shadows, the further it stretches. The shadows on the objects themselves should contour with the object's shape, like on this bow. That's what makes it feel three-dimensional, when the shadow curves around the surface instead of just sitting flat on top. And it doesn't have to be completely accurate. It just needs to be close enough to trick the eye. Our brains are quick to fill in the gaps, so as long as you follow these basic rules and the light feels consistent overall, the eye goes along with it. It's less about technical precision and more about creating a mood that feels convincing. Another useful rule is that vertical edges, like the ones on our imaginary window frame, always cast vertical shadows on vertical surfaces, like this wall, even if the light comes in at an angle. Horizontal edges aren't quite as straightforward though, so I'll save those for another video. You'll also notice the shadows of the vertical sections of the window frame don't line up between the shelf, the objects, and the wall behind. That's because the window is to the front right of the shelves, so the closer something is to the window, the more the window frame's shadow shifts towards it from a front perspective. It's easier to see from a top-down perspective. So here's the shelf, here are the objects, and the paned window to the right. This vertical divider casts a shadow here on the shelf, here on the object, and over here on the wall. And don't worry if any of this feels complicated at first. With practice, mapping shadows becomes second nature. I'll be making a more in-depth tutorial soon, as well as more videos taking on cool light effects like this, so hit subscribe if you don't want to miss them. I was a little bit stressed at the thought of adding the shadow for the whisk wires, so I just pretended it didn't exist until I had no choice. Each wire has to be one clean stroke, with no room for mistakes, which, given my practice runs, was a problem. And here's me attempting those whisk wires. Keyword attempting. Little fucking twat. Should have just kept putting it off. This wire was fine until I kept going over it for no apparent reason, and then it wasn't. So I colour matched an acrylic marker to the wall and thinned them out a bit. So yeah, I guess technically that makes 3 markers. Let's move on. Okay, that's the whole page filled out. Sometimes I'll leave it here for a clean, simple finish, but usually I'll add a few extra layers of ink to select areas to give the page more depth. Without them, every surface sits at the same value, the only difference being which parts are in light and which are in shadow. By building up extra layers on certain surfaces, like these apples compared to the fruit bowl, those areas read darker overall. It's a fairly subtle change, but it separates the objects from one another and adds a sense of depth that isn't there with just a single layer. I usually add around 4 more layers, though the number really just depends on how much will to live I have left by the end. I start by picking a few surfaces that I think should read darker than others, and add extra layers to both the light and shadows that fall across that surface. There isn't a whole lot of method to choosing which ones, but I try to spread those choices across the page for balance, and place darker tones next to lighter ones to push the contrast. We are almost at the end, so if you've made it this far, then thanks for sticking around. As this is my first proper YouTube video, I'd love to hear any feedback, what you liked, what you didn't, or even any suggestions for stuff you'd like to see. I'm still figuring out the best way to make these, and hearing from you will make a huge difference in shaping how I make the next ones better. And if you've enjoyed this, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I hope you guys like it.